American Association of University Women Educational Foundation and the Dayton Historical Depot Society present Living in Dayton, a local production by Dayton residents that documents the lives of women from early Columbia County families that shaped the community of Dayton, Washington. Following this interview is information on how you can purchase copies of this series, Living in Dayton.
Well, Priscilla asked me if bookkeeping was a new project or the apples were a new interest to me. Actually, I worked in my father's office in Spokane at Spokane Livestock Commission Company, and this is where I met Robert Erbs, and also I met Gladys Fletcher and George Baldy and Emery Bruce. And these fellows I knew from the office in Spokane, and I used to bill Gladys Fletcher's cattle when he bought cattle in Spokane and had them shipped to Starbucks. So I had a kind of a tie with the Fletcher family, not realizing that I would eventually become a Fletcher. Anyway, so when I came down, the Erbses were in the fruit business, and they needed somebody to keep books, and so little old Gladys had to work on setting up a set of books, and I took to Spokane, and my dad's accountant up there helped me set them up. And so I started in, and I kept books for the orchards for 26 years. So I had a little experience, and the most delightful part of it was learning and knowing the people. And of course, the orchards hired many people during this period. And as Hallie was saying, that the war years were on, and this was 1941 when I came here, and about 1943, we had very few men around, and we had several older fellows who ran the spray machines, some that worked in the cold storage, and of course the women did the sorting and packing and so on. And one of the interesting things, I think wages were 35 cents an hour when I came here, and we began to raise it a little bit, and when we got to 85 cents, my father-in-law, Omer Erbs, said, "We'll never make it. We can't pay 85 cents. Anyway, this was interesting through the years, and we went on to, pretty soon it was $1 more. I want to say that the apple business really contributed much towards the economics of Dayton, and there was probably about 1,000 acres of orchard here in 41. And however, the three main growers were the Erbses and Ryersons, which carried the Aurora brand, and Dumasses, who carried the Pomona brand. And these brands are labels were very important to people as it represented a quality of fruit, and the brokers and the buyers in Chicago and New York and around recognized these different labels and knew that it was a superior grade of fruit, and the label really sold much of this fruit. The Sunnybrook one, this is the Israel Erbs one, which was one of the first, and it was the oldest copyright label in the state of Washington at that time. And this one says C grade. Hold on. And this is their first label, Israel Erbs. And then when I came here in 1941, Israel's were out of the picture, and it was O.F. Erbs and Son. And so then our next label was this, which is Sunnybrook, as you'll notice, and that was a copyright and registered label. And there were thousands of boxes put out under this label. And then Pomona had a label which I have not had the good luck of finding. So, but later, Pomona or Dumas packed with the Herbses and used the Sunnybrook label. And this is J.L. Dumas. And J.L. Dumas was Lauren Dumas's father. And when I came here in 41, Mr. Dumas Sr. was then deceased, and Lauren and Florence were running the orchards down there. And the Dumas orchard, I believe, was the earliest planting. And I have a postcard that says 1907, and these trees are 8 or 9 years old. So that puts it back into the 1880s somewhere. And so these 3 orchards were really the main volume of the apple industry here. And the Herbses had the only cold storage, but each of these other places, Aurora and Dumas, had packing plants. And of course, this was everything about the orchard at that time was hand labor, except the spraying, but the thinning was hand labor, and all of the sorting and grading and packing, everything was done by hand. And of course, we picked in a standard apple box at that time, and later it was converted to the large tote bin. And so the different orchards then were developed, and we had the Danielson orchard, which was down near Huntsville. And then we had, I have to get this one, Mill Stream, which was Fullerton's, also at Huntsville. And all these people either packed with the Herbses or stored with them, or just stored with them. Anyway, and because it was the only cold storage at that time. And then in later years we had the Patricks, which was part of the Moore orchard, Herbs orchard at one time. Kind of interesting. The Herbses bought this ground below town where Dick Patrick lives, and part of the Eslick place. They bought it from the Moore brothers in Walla Walla, who were the bankers at that time. And this was just during 1918 time, and they paid $70,000 down on this orchard and lost it. So this was one of the many tales of woe that came about. I always said when they talked about 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine, I'm sure they were talking about the apple business. And there was no guarantee of anything. And of course, we watched the wheat farmer with his little subsidy and different things, and we just struggled away. And sometimes we made it and sometimes we didn't. And then through the years, the orchards got on really a plight of destruction. And one of the very first parts of the destruction was the freeze of November 11th, 1955. And on that day to 1914, the temperature dropped to about 20 below from a nice sunny day, and it split and cracked and killed most trees under 10 years old and many of the old trees. And as a result of that freeze, there was no crop the next year. Then this cold storage that we had was Weinhardt Brewery. And this was converted, of course, to cold storage and packing shed. And when I first began to see these pictures of the Weinhardt Brewery, I'd say, where was that building? I couldn't identify it. And all of a sudden I discovered, you know, if you just look just right, and you go down that alley, well, there's my office, and there's this, and there's that. And one of the kind of interesting things when we begin to talk about our depot here, I thought it was really interesting because most every working day, I would come to this building or to the NP depot and bill carloads of fruit. And so I got to know this place pretty well. And I knew some of the railroad fellows too. And so one day they said to me, why didn't you tell us who you were? In other words, why didn't I tell them that I used to be Gladys Herbst? Well, I said I didn't know I had to play politics to save the depot. Well, they said it helps. I'll go on about the fruit a little more. Our first disaster was the freeze. And then we came to the period of 1962, I believe it was in August or July, I'm not sure. The cold storage burned. The brewery building burned to the ground. Well, this was quite a shock to the apple industry that was left, because there was no really storage, cold storage, and there was very little packing facility. So then Damaris's, the Ryerson orchard had been sold to the Damaris's, and they were packing up there, and they proceeded to build a cold storage on their place, and Dumas developed a little cold storage on his place, and Danielson Taggart Orchard, they had a little cold storage. So there was some little storages built, but nothing, no controlled atmosphere storages or that sort of thing, but just cold storage. And they struggled along. And when this flood or fire hit, well, it really killed the shipment of apples from this valley. And we had a reputation of golden delicious that really no one could compare their fruit to this Tusha Valley fruit. This was a fine grain and good quality and good keeper and good looking and all of this. So we had this Sunnybrook label that helped. However, we started trucking our apples to Wenatchee, which is 200 miles, 400-mile round trip, and we took it to a co-op. And of course, the apples were always sold through brokers, and Gwynn White and Prince was our broker for many years, and then it became, then Hilliard Joseph was our broker. And when we got to the end of the year, went to the meeting, wonderful. We got a check for $365 for our crop after hauling it to Wenatchee. They had graded it, charged us all of these costs. And I said to Bob, hell, I can sell more than that on the street in a day. No more are we going to Wenatchee. 2 years later, we had the flood, December 22nd, 1964. It was a beautiful day, just about like this January or February's been. We had a freeze, then we had a skift of snow, and then we had a chinook, and we had a 3-day rain, and the temperatures got to 60. and between December 22nd, 1964 and December 25th, we lost much of the orchard, lost the home and everything in it, lost all of the buildings on the place, and it was real interesting. I waited out in a pair of tennis shoes and a pair of blue jeans and was glad that I was out. And so that really finished the herbs. Well, I enjoyed the apple business very much. It was certainly a challenge. I came here young, innocent, and learned much. And all this time I learned about Dayton and its people. And I've been here 50 years, and I will remain. I'm thankful that I had the privilege of telling a little bit about the fruit, because it was an important part of our lives. After the flood, I had a pair of tennis shoes and a pair of blue jeans and one dress, and between freeze, fire, and flood, I didn't have any money. And I drove school bus, worked for Green Giant, which I said I was never going to do, but I did. I worked in the office at night, and then I worked in the warehouse one year. Anyway, and then in the meantime, I began to develop this antique business. I had always had antiques in my home, restored them, never sold any, just bought them, fixed them. The only thing I wanted new was a mattress, that sort of thing, but anything else I wanted it old. So I had this kind of following, and I had friends in Spokane who had antique shops, and they said, well, Gladys, you've always talked about having an antique shop. Why don't you go home and do it? Well, I was so depressed and broke that I thought, well, all right. Dayton had never had an antique shop, and at that time there wasn't even a second-hand store. So, man, the field was open. So I rented the little building where Stone Machinery had their mechanic in back, and right on the corner of 4th and Main, and I paid $15 a month. And the city charged me $3.50 for water, sewage, and garbage, which I didn't have, but I had to pay it. Anyway, that was a pet peeve, that $3.50. I hated to pay that. Anyway, I took $250, which I had borrowed from my son, Jim, and no inventory, and I started buying and trading and selling. In the first year, I sold $12,000 worth of merchandise. Well, that kind of convinced me that maybe I could make it in the antique business. And so, what do you know, I'm still trying to make that buck, still chasing it. But I learned a lot of things since then. And my father said when I opened my shop, he said, you'll be surprised what people will ask for and what they're looking for and what they'll buy. But the price enters into it. And I remember that many times. And so it's been a wonderful experience for me, and I certainly grew in knowledge and history and people, the knowledge of people. And I like people, and I like old things, new things, and everything. So that's my story.
This is April 3rd, 1991, and I'm Dean Smith, a member of the board of the Dayton Historic Depot. Following a board meeting of the Dayton Historical Depot, Gladys Fletcher, a longtime board member and one of those who had the vision to restore this wonderful structure, will tell us of some of the stories as to how it all happened.
Gladys Fletcher, and I have lived in Dayton for 50 years and have been one of the 4 planners of our historical depot. I had the pleasure of going to Williamsburg, Virginia, and seeing the restoration there. And when I came back, I looked around and I thought, oh, we have more than those places. They had to rebuild and start from scratch. And here we have this wonderful historical, or depot. It wasn't historical at that time, but it was old. And I went up to the auditor's office and I said, what's going to happen to our little depot? It was all boarded up and the corner was leaning and the yard was in terrible condition. In fact, the whole building looked in terrible condition. And he said, well, next month it's coming down. Well, I just kind of lost all of my breath, and I thought, my word, how can it really come down? And so I said, who do we contact? What are we going to do? We aren't going to let it be destroyed. Well, he said, the Union Pacific owns it, and a subsidiary of the Union Pacific is Upland, who is really Upland Industries, who is really the controller of our of the property, and they're the ones that are going to have ordered it to be destroyed. So prior to this, we, as a group or committee or community, I don't know who, had some little note cards made with the picture of the depot. And I sat down and wrote a note to the headquarters of the Union Pacific in Portland. And I said, what a shame, you know, to destroy this building. It is a historical building. And let the community have it. Well, they weren't too enthusiastic. And then they said, then the next correspondence was, you could have it, but you have to move it off the lot. Well, we weren't going to move it off the lot in the first place. No, we weren't really organized to do much of anything. We were still just in the talking stage. So then they, we finagled around about that a long time. And finally they came back and they said, we'll sell you the land. You form a society or corporation or something, we'll sell you the land. Well, of course we didn't have any money. We weren't going to buy any land. And I think they wanted $24,000, which sounded like a lot for the land. And then they would give us the building. Well, we all wondered how we were going to do all this. We had still no money, and just a little enthusiasm was about it. So then some of us got together, and we asked the grain growers, the Farm Bureau, the Broughton Land Company, the bank, and other Green Giant, if they wouldn't write a letter to the Upland Industries and say that the community really wanted to preserve this building, and would they not, would they give us the ground and the building? Well, they hem-hawed a long time, and then Alice Poole kind of entered into this, and the Pooles were leasing part of the land down here. And Alice was studying the history of our community. And you see, this building was actually over against Rock Hill to start with. And then it was moved. And it was moved to this location, and the community and the citizens of the community gave this ground to the railroad because they wanted this railroad located in the heart of their community. So there we had a little wedge, because history said we gave to the railroad this ground. Now please give it back. So this was sort of the cinching statement, I believe, that we finally succeeded in acquiring the building. And there were many people that worked really hard for us. It was not anyone's effort, it was really the total community. And when we received this, it was in 1975. They came and we had a little dedication. And they gave us the building and the ground. And then we had a little ceremony, and it was really quite eventful. And so then Leo Forge and Charlotte and Vernon Smith became a committee, and they decided that this building should be dedicated to the pioneers of Columbia County. And they, with this committee, they proceeded to raise monies for the support of the building. And yet at this time, we had no money, and we had formed a society, of course. And I personally contributed $75 to this checking account so that we could be identified at the bank. And Liam and Charlotte and Vernon went out and raised monies for our in memorial to our historical building. And through their efforts, they raised approximately $50,000 to start with. And this was on the plaques downstairs. And this was really a big boost. And then when we went into the historical part of it and establishing this, we had to, of course, have money and plans and all of these things. And we started out with phase number 1, which required that we have monies, and then the state contributed some, and federal monies. And then in our phase 1, the first thing we had to do was build a foundation. This building, after it was moved, was set on railroad ties. And this is kind of a marshy area here, swampy in fact. It looked like we built a moat when we started jacking up the building and putting the foundation. It was a miserable, wet, terrible job. And Gene Delp and his men had the contract, and they put the foundation under this building. And that cost us about $14,000, which was quite a blow to us because we had many other things we needed to do. Then we had to rebuild the balcony, re-roof it, and the windows were all boarded at the time we acquired it, and many window panes were broken, so we had to replace many window panes. And each little step and each little project, many people within the community, people that we never thought would be interested, and the school, children, FFA, many people contributed. This was really a community effort. And then, of course, we had to pay for the patio, as they call it, or the court. And you might notice that it's stamped like brick, but it isn't brick. This was quite a project. Different one worked on the design of it and how it was to be done. Lots of study was done. And you notice the coloring and all was really a big contribution to the historical appearance of the building. And that was about phase number 1. And I think we spent about $38,000 to this point. And then we didn't know really what we were going to do. We had all the interior to do. And of course we had applied for another grant of some time. And the state and federal, and we were continually working on trying to get our community to contribute, which they did do. We had auctions, we had raffles, many little functions of different kinds to try to raise monies for our depot. And at this time, we were very fortunate in Dayton because Hubert Donahue was on Ways and Means of the state of Washington. He was our representative at this point. And he said he sat in a committee they were trying to distribute the monies at the end of the year in this Ways and Means Committee, and different ones were asking for monies, different communities were asking for monies for new construction to put old things. And we wanted monies for our old building. And we really hadn't asked Hubert. I don't know, we just didn't really realize, but Hubert knew we needed it. And Hubert got real brave one day and asked for $83,000 from this committee. And bless his heart, he really worked at it. And one day we were notified that we had been awarded this grant of $83,000. Well, this was wonderful. We knew then that we could finish this building. So really, we were cut a little bit on this $83,000 to $80,000. And it had to be, we were declared a private society, not public. And so it had to be administered through the city, which was sort of a struggle. We had to have a little legal work and all kinds of things, but anyhow, the city did do it. And we went ahead and hired George Harvey and his son and some others to do the interior of this building. And we did a lot of talk, a lot of planning, and everyone was very cooperative, and we had help from Bob Johnson and Linda Rice and others in the colors and design to a point. One of my pet remarks was when I came up here and looked, the railroad should have been ashamed to ask their employees to live in this condition. This was very unsightly, this upstairs. And of course it was always living quarters, but was very, very neglected. And throughout the years, the women who had lived here had papered the walls here. Of course, this paper was something that was fashionable in its day. And this, we kind of visualize that the interior upstairs here maybe at one time was one big room, and bit by bit as they decided that they were going to have resident here, they made several bedrooms, and the kitchen is in the location that the little apartment is now. And there was living room about in this area, but between the living room and the kitchen, it was an open area, of course, and we rearranged things a bit. But to see the effort of many and the planning and fortitude and contribution financially and physically, mentally, that our community contributed to this building, it really is a true contribution to our city. And it was really the beginning of recognizing that we do have a historical town. And this too helped the courthouse, because these two buildings, both the depot and the courthouse, are the two oldest buildings of their kind in the state of Washington. I really believe that that would sort of complete my review on this. Is there any question from any of you?
Gladys, could you say something about listing the depot on the National Historic Register? What was involved?
Well, this was quite a struggle because it was the first one in our community, and none of us knew too much about it. And Liz Ankeny came with forms, and she had gone to some meeting and acquired them. And she said, "Here they are. Now what are we going to do?" It really is. And the historical state, national and historical society were really not very prominent in the area, and it was difficult. So we took the forms. I took the forms to Cecil Albee, who says, you know, he was manager of the Park District, because I say many people helped him. And he helped fill it out, answer the questions, and we sent it in. And this was sort of the way we sent it into this. It had to go through the state first and then hit the national. And after the state recognized it, then the national would recognize it. So that was sort of the way this part was done. Yeah, we were all pretty naive about what all we had to do. We had no idea really, and so we just stumbled along, and each one would get a little idea of what we had to do next, and we did it, and kept coordinating and grouping together. And
who were the original board members?
well, let me think.
Richard White was on.
Yes, Richard White and Ron Williams and Harriet Brownlee and myself. In our scrapbook somewhere we have all of this, I believe. And there's one young man that was from the Cannon, and I can't even remember
Dave
his
Seidel.
name.
Dave Seidel.
Yeah, maybe Dave Seidel. I believe that was right. And so this is
Gladys,
sort of-
when did it actually, you finished the phases in, that last phase in
in
76?
No, we finished on the birthday of the depot, which was in 81. The depot was then 100 years old, and we had a big birthday party. And of course, that was sort of the beginning of what we're calling Depot Days today. And it was completed at that time. And we started working on it in 1975. So it was quite a little period. And as I say, we go about so far and then we wonder what we were going to do, where we were going next, but somewhere something always came. So this was wonderful. And then I won't go into the trust fund, but we had the good fortune of the Ernestine Peabody Memorial that was contributed by Harriet Bishop and Mary Kleinstad, both the Broughton heirs, and they contributed monies to, the original money was $16,000, and then they added to it. And it is a trust fund, and it is not to be spent, and it's to be maintained at the, I believe it was $26,000, and we have had several contributions to it since then, and only the interest and income from it is to be spent. And of course, we have used that several times here for painting and the interest and different things. And this has helped us tremendously because contributions through the years now have dwindled to quite a degree, but we have been self-supporting. And this part here, the tower, is what burned when Ben McGill got the potatoes too warm. And so this is, it was bought from Weinhardt in about 1923. And prior to that, they had some packing in the orchards. And the location of the malt house and the brewery was on Front and Commercial, which is now a vacant lot owned by the REA. This is the main part of the brewery, which was built in about 1880, and this was the packing shed and the labeling room and the office, and the machine room was in the base of it. Anyway, and this is a wooden building, and you'll notice the curtains above. When the Weinhardts first built that, they lived above, and that became our labeling room. We're connected, and it's strange to have two different buildings, but by the time I got here, they were all connected, and there was a long porch on the street side and down the alley. And so I never thought of it as two buildings. In fact, when I first saw these pictures, I couldn't figure where they were until I really studied. And Dean Wallace said, Gladys, can't you figure that out? So anyhow, I walked down the alley and I could see then that was the building, and I said, there was my office and so on. But anyway, it, through the years, changed quite a little bit. And this, of course, this is the building that burned in 1962 and was total destruction. Well, this picture is of the Herbs Crew about 1916, 15, 16. And the one person that I can easily identify is Pete Anderson. Pete Anderson was a young man at that time, and he came here from Denmark and worked most of his adult life for the Herbses. And of course he worked for the city in his later almost semi-retired age, and I think Pete lived to be 98 or 99 years old. And so he was always part of the crew, and he ran picking crews, and then later managed the sorting and packing crew. And his wife Teresa packed. And one of the interesting things, as I look and think about the first days I was here, and I can see Mrs. Jim Morris and Daisy Abel and some of the others packing. And I can just see them today like they looked at that time. And it's interesting to watch these people. Of course, many of them are elderly now in nursing homes and all. It's sad to see. But I did learn a lot about them. And then we have, okay, this is a picture down at the Moore Orchard, which is where the Patricks now live, and all of that flat was in apples at one time, and this is the place that the Herbs had paid $70,000 on and lost. And these three fellows here on the end I can easily identify, and others I have not tried. But this is Ben McGill and Omer Herbs and Pete Anderson. And Ben McGill, of course, worked and was one of our neighbors and always worked in the apples. And Pete was always there. And then it was Omer. And Omer married Jessie Israel. And Mr. Israel had planted the first 10 acres of orchard. And they were winter bananas. And he had not tasted them or seen a winter banana. And so Mr. Dumas and Lorne, who was the apple polisher boy at the time, and the Israels and Herbs went to Spokane to the International Apple Show. And this was before 1908 because Mr. Israel died in Halloween of 1908. So this was early. Anyway, Mr. Israel just couldn't wait to see this apple that he had planted, and it was a winter banana, and I don't know if any of you know what a winter banana is. It's kind of a yellow apple, and not very good for very long. But he took one, Lauren Damas told me this, he said he took one great big bite out of it and spit it out. He said, and to think I'm fool enough to have planted 10 acres of it. I'm going home and pull them out.
Died in 1908.
And so Omer Herbs came here and of course married Jess, and they were married at that time, and so Omer was young, ambitious, and so he took over the management and sales of the apples and the oranges, the peaches. And he and Jess sold apples with their piano wagons. And Jess played the piano, and she played at the Opera House. And this is how they really got together. She could chord and help sell those pianos. And Omer could sell those pianos to people, and he really was quite a salesman around. Most of these pianos you see around town here, Omer sold to them.